but I do have 2 teachers in the Grapevine system now. You may applaud, yes. I'll introduce one in a minute. The other one is not here, but I'm so proud, and Daddy would be very proud to know that we have 2 girls who are teachers in the system. I mean, you know. Oh, wait, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I'm going to move my stuff out of your way.
All right, please raise your hand if you can't, and we'll try to turn off the squeak and get everything going. Who was W.F. Cannon Jr.? When I was asked to do this program, my first reaction was, I'm honored, but I just did it. Now, Tommy said he didn't have it in the records, and how time flies. When I researched it, my recent speech about my father was in 1999, 23 years ago. Who was W.F. Cannon Jr.? If you ask him, he probably would have said something like, he's just an average farm boy with an intense desire to better himself, to get a good education and help others to do the same. He was obsessed with learning, especially history, and if you were ever lucky enough to sit in on one of his lectures and really listen, you might discover that history wasn't half as bad as you thought it was. In fact, it really had something to offer. Let us recreate some Grapevine history, which you won't find in the history books, but only in the minds of those who lived it and desire to share it with those who follow in their footsteps. First, I need to know a little bit about the audience. How many of you were in any kind of school between 1938 and 1958? Oh, great. Okay, now of those of you, were you in the Grapevine school system? Okay, we got a few. And now that includes the ones that came in later, like Coppell and Miners Chapel and the Glade and all that, okay? Can I see those hands again? May I see those hands again? Mrs. Bickers would have a fit. Now, leave your hands up. How many remember W.F. Cannon, or who went to school when he was superintendent? That's what I thought. Okay, so I'm talking to a new crop. And that includes my family, who never knew him. I gave them very little notice tonight, but I do have a representation of my family whom I want you to meet. I love having them here, but I must admit I'm a little nervous because I have never spoken in front of them, but Barry reminds me that I do that every Sunday after church. So I guess that's true. My husband, Cy Holley, and I were married August 31st, 1957. Daddy gave me away and died 11 months later. It was like he gave me away permanently. But then, 11 months after he passed, my oldest son was born. My dear little grandmother explains death as someone dies and the miracle of birth occurs and a new baby is born. And that has given me courage and comfort through the years because that so often happens in our families. But I would like you to meet my family, and as I call their names, would you please stand and remain standing so you can get a huge ovation of clap. And the first one is my firstborn, Barry. Barry, would you please stand? That's fine. And his lovely wife, Beth. Beth is also a teacher, but she's also a speech therapist, and that's what she's doing right now. And then we have Let's see who's next is my granddaughter, Hannah. Hannah, would you please stand? Now, you have to be careful with Hannah because Hannah is with the Dallas Sheriff's Department. So be on your P's and Q's tonight, if you would. And then we have my grandson, her brother, Hayden Holley, who is following in his dad's footsteps. Dad is in Telluride. Oh, my goodness. But Hayden is with Merrill Lynch, and we're very proud of him. And then very last but not least is our teacher of the year, Mackenzie, Hayden's wife. And newly this year with the Grapevine system, so she got to go to the luncheon the other day. Thank you for standing. You may sit down now. That's all you have to do. I'm here tonight to attempt to introduce you to the more private person who did more behind the scenes to give of himself, individuals, school, community, and church. To my knowledge, he never tooted his own horn. It was 40 years after his death when I was preparing my first speech on him, studying old family letters, talking to friends and family, reading the contents of his trunk, which was full of his notes and writings, that one letter struck me as very sad. It was a letter to his sister, Margaret. Margaret, I feel like such a failure. Everything I've tried to do in my life has just turned out wrong. Perhaps he was referring to his canceled player's contract with the Fort Worth Cats. I bet you didn't know that. It was canceled as a result of a tractor accident at the family farm in Roanoke. The tractor slid in a ditch, rolled, and pinned him underneath, crushing his arm. He would never throw again. Even on the hottest days, he hid the deformity with long sleeves. But he never lost his love for baseball, and that continues today in the family DNA. He dabbled in politics, running and losing in the county school superintendent's race. I was in the 6th grade and shared his disappointment. He never accomplished his greatest ambition to complete his doctorate, take early retirement from public schools, and teach history in a college, preferably in Colorado, where it was cool. On the brighter side, and here comes the good stuff, the Historical Society's programs this year prompted a flood of memories for me, and I hope it did for you. Tommy did a great job. Our 50s football players gave a laughter-provoking program on life on the field and in the classroom. But can you imagine the following happening today? Every Halloween, it seemed that WF was presented a gift, usually on our front porch. A deceased raccoon propped up to look alive. The same for possums and other creatures. But the straw that broke Daddy's patience was a section of bleachers from the football field, gangplanked to block access to the front door. On Monday morning, Daddy made his rounds of the senior high classrooms, calling out names of selected football players. William Buckner, Alan Cluck, Jimmy Wood, Ted Ware, Bob Roberts, to name a few. Boys, he said calmly, you are to walk to my house and hand carry the obstacle on my front porch back to the school ground and return it to its proper resting place. You are to waste no time in doing so. The bleacher section was cumbersome and heavy, and that was the last of the surprises on our front porch. Mr. Cannon was a strict disciplinarian and maintained paddles of various descriptions, which he used frequently. And would you believe and be surprised to know that they were actually condoned by the parents? And if your behavior was such that you received a paddling at school, you could depend on getting one when you got home. Would that be happening today? But there was the less frightening side to this man. The period from 1938 to 1958 was a time of slow recovery from the Depression. Turmoil, uncertainty, and yes, fear about the war. The Great War, remember that? The war to end all wars? And the exciting post-war years. In 1938, and this was referred to a while ago, he was in Germany as superintendent of schools. He had accomplished a great deal, but he wanted to seek employment to something that offered him a greater opportunity. Grapevine had an opening. He sent the usual application with letters of recommendation, and I'd like to share a portion of one of those letters. To quote, when Mr. Cannon became superintendent, he always wanted to be president of the United States, but that didn't matter. He'd been there 10 years in Germany, and it was a non-affiliated school with a scant equipment, and it is now accredited and modernly equipped. He exhibits great initiative, understands school finance thoroughly, and rates high with the State Department of Education. I could hardly overestimate the value of his assistance during this Depression period in securing a grant of $24,000 from the federal government, which was used in the construction of the new brick building in German. Signed, Ernest B. Whitaker, County Superintendent. I believe Daddy used the same approach when dealing with the WPA here in getting the new one-story elementary building, which many of you remember. I'm sure it's no longer here, and I don't remember when it was torn down. That was the year that it was dedicated, was the year that we went from 11 grades to 12 grades. I don't know if you remember that either. Yes, we only had 11 grades in school, and that's why we all graduated so early. We were all very proud of that building. And I do remember when we dedicated it, because I was in the first grade for 2 weeks. We were all given a test, and some of us were double promoted. And that's how we got to 12th grade. The war years in Grapevine brought many changes, mostly obstacles. But it also brought a sense of community to us. Service clubs changed their meeting formats from programs to folding bandages, collecting scrap metal, organizing a free used clothing and bedding store. So many activities that provided for us socializing, just like we had during COVID, right? The school system was right in the middle, helping in every aspect. We children collected tinfoil and rolled it into little balls that were about the shape of baseballs, saved our dimes for war bonds. One unique effort was Miss Willie Mae Atkins. Does anybody remember her? She was the 4th grade teacher, and I was a part of that. We were taught knitting for hospitals, lamp blankets. Yes, every one of our students were taught, not all successfully. At the same time, WF made sure his students had the necessary needs. Some students came to school with no shoes or coats, having had no breakfast, maybe very little food at home over the weekend, no bath, and head lice was rampant. Sound familiar? He had a special closet in his office of nearly new donated items, or sometimes he purchased them himself with his own money when he could find a good buy. Teachers sent the students to his office as discreetly as possible, where they were provided clothing, a towel, soap, and washcloth, sent to the locker room for a shower if necessary, and on to the lunchroom where our dear lunchroom ladies prepared a little breakfast for them. On Fridays, some lunch leftovers were packed for them to take home for the weekend. This was made by Mr. Cannon stopping by the surplus store in Fort Worth on Saturdays and filling our car with staples for minimal prices. I remember real butter was 10 cents a pound. It might have been considered an early Head Start program. Before I leave this subject, I must share my favorite anecdote. As you can imagine, there were few men left in Grapevine, as most were serving their country in uniform. There were no men in the school system except WF, who served as superintendent, principal, substitute teacher, bus driver, janitor, etc. Then came the surprise, seemingly no more hours in the day. For lack of a coach, the school board canceled the entire athletic program, except for Louise Clark's gym classes. The not-so-happy citizenry appealed to the school board with the argument that the decision was detrimental to the well-being and spirit of the community. In response to this outcry, Mr. Cannon was encouraged to add that to his day. For 2 years, he coached football, basketball. Sometimes I was even drafted to help with the scorekeeping, baseball, and gave the track team advice. He lettered in track at North Texas. You may have seen his picture up there in a track uniform. I didn't even know that till I did a little bit of, I was looking at his old annual and discovered that he had lettered in track. It was amazing. All of this was done with the help of the athletes themselves. They manicured the playing fields and swept and polished the gym floor. That effort kept us in the University Interscholastic League, and in years to come, Mr. Cannon would become the longtime director of Tarrant County UIL, sports and academics, and Grapevine has won numerous first place awards. Some of you may have won those. I think Ellen Jean won the secretary, yeah. Yes, from Mrs. Huffman. I remember that one, yeah. Daddy was proud of the dedication and creativity of his teachers. He worked very hard to recruit the very best during those difficult years. And I believe that their longevity after the war proved he had made the right decisions. Certainly those of us who were in school at that time feel we got a good education. There is an interesting story that you may not know. A lovely and talented young woman by the name of Madeline Hemley, the wife of John Hemley, whom you heard about, I think, last month with the amateur radio, ham radio operators, of which he was one. Anyway, Mrs. Hemley approached Mr. Cannon with the idea that Grapevine School should have a music program. He regrettably told her that he didn't have the funds. Persistent as she was, we all know that, those of you who had her, she proposed that she teach for free until he could afford to pay her. Of course, she won the argument and taught every level of grades for many, many years. It seemed to me that for years we were never at home. If it wasn't church or school, it was the war effort. But one Saturday a month was truly family time. We saved our gas stamps to go to the farm in Jacksboro, and that was such fun for me. We filled our car with wonderful canned fruits and vegetables that my grandmother had done, fresh milk and home-churned butter. My dad caught a few fish, and my grandmother wrung a couple of chicken necks. Good eating for the next month. Oh, such good memories. 2 Saturdays, and sometimes 3, were the all-day trips to Fort Worth, devoted most entirely to the war effort. WF served on the gas rationing board, and I wish he had written a book on all the excuses that came from the residents on why they needed more gas stamps. My mother worked all day at the USO canteen. I was on the USO Hospital Entertainment Travel Troupe. Still the most rewarding job I ever had. I continued for years after the war, moving from county to county veterans hospitals, always hoping to be called up to Bob Hope's international troupe. But that was one of my great failures. Yes, W.F. Cannon had many interests. He made no secret that he wanted a son. Well, you can see that didn't happen. But he taught me to hunt, to fish, to appreciate all critters for their purpose in life, and to drive a stick shift at age 10. My grandfather added how to ride a cutting horse, to bandage a wound and not be afraid of the blood, and to respect and use a loaded gun. WF was a good cook. He loved travel, was a faithful member of the Grapevine Lions Club and the Grapevine Masons. He wrote poetry and short stories, was an avid reader and a good public speaker, and appreciated those qualities in others. You might not know that he carried the rural mail for the regular postman when he was on vacation in the summertime, and dug graves and helped with services for both funeral homes when they had no able-bodied men. One of his closest friends, Reverend Gilbert Wilson, said at his funeral, "The Cannon family were my closest friends. I spent hours in their house. They treated me like a son, encouraged and supported me in my studies for the ministry, and cheered me up with their incredible sense of humor." Daddy's sense of humor couldn't be more adequately expressed than this. And this is my very favorite story. He and his friend, Mr. Dawson, went fishing one Saturday morning, only to come up on a road-killed female skunk with 3 lost babies scurrying about. They attempted to catch the little ones. 2 got away, but Daddy rescued the little female. We had always had cats, and skunks are a bit like fastidious cats, so guess who decided to keep it? It would be a perfect joke to have as a pet, and a deterrent for his constant array of salesmen who appeared at the door at all hours. And what a pleasant surprise for Shirley returning on holiday from college. After a rabies shot and being de-skunked, little Petunia made a delightful and entertaining house pet. More than one salesperson made a quick retreat from the front door. Unfortunately, after 18 months, she caught a bronchial infection and died after an allergic reaction to penicillin. Mr. Cannon was a loyal member of the First Baptist Church. He was the teacher of the men's Bible class. His dedication to accepted responsibilities was impeccable. On July 20th, 1958, a hot Sunday morning, he had just finished preparing his Bible study. He went out to start his car. No luck. So he pushed it down the driveway to give it some momentum. He drove it to the post office on Main Street to get the Sunday newspaper. parking his car across the street in front of the Western Auto Store. And that's where his Bible class found him, slumped against the wheel, Bible open at his side. His heart couldn't stand the heat and the exertion. Now, so as not to end on a sad note, here's what happened next. Madeline Hemley and Velma Stubbs, Velma was the wife of the principal of the high school and a good friend. And Velma and Madeline also contended with Daddy on cooking. They all liked to cook, and each one thought they were better than the next one. On hearing of his death, realizing that I might have some difficulty getting back home from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where my husband was in the service, they hurried over to the house to help me out by straightening up, only to discover a kitchen full of full pots and pans. It seems WF had spent Saturday picking pounds of grapes and was in the process of making grape jelly. With true dedication, the ladies spent several hours finishing his project. The completed product was distributed among the teachers and close friends. When my husband and I returned to Texas in 1991, Cy was so impressed with what Grapevine had become that we decided to participate and helped with the restoration of the Palace Theater in honor of WF. Cy wanted to leave a legacy for my dad, as he never quite got over his passing so early in our marriage. Within the last few years, the community has bestowed several honors posthumously on this average man who wanted to make a difference. The family is touched and appreciative for this recognition. Thank you. Now, if you have questions or you want to add an anecdote, please put up your hand if this prompted anything that you'd like to talk about. I got a hand. Margaret Telford would like to say something.
Okay. As you've heard, you'll understand why he was in our inaugural class at the GCISD Welcome Honors. So if you go to Mustang Panther Stadium, there's a class, right class where you go in that honors Mr. Cannon. And truly, the very least that he deserves for all the years.
Thank you, Margaret. A copy of that is back there on the wall, with the wording, if anybody wants to see it. Anybody else want to add anything? Jean. Oh, yes, I forgot about that. Well, there's so many things, and I don't know about the time. I guess we're okay. Yes, Daddy really wanted to support the ladies' clubs in Grapevine, and when the Bayview Club and the 36th Club had their annual teas, he let the teachers off so they could go to the tea, and he used those of us who were in high school as substitute teachers to go and take care of the classrooms. Yes, that's what you want me to tell, right? We had a wonderful homemaking program, so we knew how to do all kinds of things in school. Anybody else have another comment or anything? Bill.
I just wanted to say that I remember where I was when the word came that he had passed away. I could have told you it was, I thought it was on a Sunday in July of 1958, just before my junior year. And I remembered it just like you told me. But he was a distinctive looking man. He had those distinctive eyes, bald head. He wore liked to wear light suits and dark ties. But the thing I remember about him the most, he had kind of a glide when he walked. He almost a skip to his gait. It was very unusual, but I remember that very much, seeing him walk through the hallways. It was very unusual, just like Mr. Stubbs was so quiet. He made no motion and made no noise.
That's interesting. I never noticed that. But that's very interesting, Bill. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yes, Jan?
There's no doubt you touched so many hearts in Grapevine. You told me a story about Gary Black. I think you should share it.
You want to tell it or you want me to? Well, I love it. Daddy, he loved kids. He really and truly did. Although the ones, when they got paddled, they didn't think he loved them very much. But he really did. And Gary's dad died, Gary Black, who most of you knew. Dad died, and Daddy was very upset about that because it was a time in Gary's life when he was quite young and he missed his dad, and so Daddy sort of took him under his wing. And Gary told the story, and I think it's in the character book, if you want to refer to it. But it was so kind of Gary to share it with me when I came back, and that was that Daddy took him fishing, and he did all kinds of things for him, and he encouraged him to stay in school. Gary was going to drop out, and he encouraged him to stay in school, and look what he became and how well he did later on. And he always attributed that to my dad's encouragement. And thank you, Jan, for memory. Yes?
I think this could be a valid story, but I remember when you talked about your dad before and about how the boys that got in trouble, you know what I'm talking about? The boys that got in trouble got to go and help whenever they needed the ditches where the flooding was and such to be done. And then, you know, he kept those boys in line. And I just miss your heck and not being here for this, because that was really, it was his story talking about how they were, you know, if you got in trouble, you found a job to do on Saturday morning or whatever.
He had a unique way of punishment other than paddling, which worked. It really and truly did. I think he was a good teacher. He probably preferred to teach than he did to be an administrative person. But teachers made nothing. Administrators made next to nothing, but that was, you know, that's the way it was. Anybody else? Yes, Tom.
You know, Shirley, my mother took the census all through the war, I guess. I don't know, you know, she always took the census. And she took down every person's name, their birthday, everything. And so WL required that, in that he wanted to know what was going on. And, you know, to be able to plan and set out, and my mother thought the world of WL. And eventually, he's the one that made the decision to, we had boomers. I'm a boomer, okay? we were exploding our population, and we had to down people, you know. I mean, my gosh, we couldn't handle it unless we built a building. And so he's the one that decided that we had Coppell, we had Carroll Hill, if y'all know where Carroll Hill is, right? And we had Colleyville. In Colleyville, he went and asked each area, you know, the grade schools that fed in. He's the one that made the decisions that you know, he knew what was going on. And my mother thought he was a planner to the core. And today, what kind of planning do we have in the schools as far as that goes? You know, we've come 180 degrees from that. And my mother thought the world of WF. It was almost makes me want to, you know, say, what are we doing today in our schools, you know?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I keep hearing new things all the time. It's great. Yes, Judy.
You know, Shirley, in those years when I was in school, you know, Grapevine was a segregated community. And the black children at their school down on North Dooley Street. And I believe your father was very helpful to that school as well.
Yes, he was the superintendent for that school. I think they had 6 grades. And I was really young, so if anybody is there anybody in here older than I am? But I don't know. He was in charge of that, and I do have I have another story. The principal of that school, what's her name? Opal Jack. Who does it? Yes, Opal. I knew it was Opal something. The school was named for her. Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you. Anyway, she came to our house every Saturday morning, that early, before we went off and took our little tours. She came to our house to make a report on what had happened during the week, and to get Daddy's advice and counsel on what she needed to do next and all that kind of thing. And it was very interesting because my mother always served her coffee and donuts or sweet rolls or something like that, and in the living room. And someone found out about it and spread the word, and people were horrified because she had entertained my mother in her living room. But it was a wonderful thing, and so I grew up with her. It was a different kind of growing up because I got a different aspect on what was happening in the community. Betty, you had your hand up. Oh, you didn't? Oh, I thought you did. Anybody else? I mean, because we should close, right, Tommy? Wait, Tommy, you want me to stop? You know?
We haven't given you the hook yet, you're all right.
Oh, okay. Does my family have anything to say? This is the first time they have heard a speech on their grandfather, right?
I'm just enjoying hearing everything. Well before my time, so.
Absolutely, you didn't know him at all. And I'm so thrilled that you are here, that you can get a different aspect on your family and the history. Thank you for coming. I'm real proud of them.
You mentioned about W.F. Cannon being big in baseball in his day and time, and that you're going into DNA through your family. This young man, it went right through to him, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
He was very big, if I understand this correctly, he was very big in high school, in baseball, and in college. Pitcher. What?
And I don't even know what position Daddy played. I have no idea. Couldn't find it. I couldn't find it anywhere. And but it has gone down, and his father lives, breathes, and coughs baseball.
How old was he when he had that accident?
He was in college, so it was in the 20s, but he was in college when it happened, yeah. It took him a long time to get through school, because he had to work his way all the way, and sometimes he took out an entire semester, but most of the time it was the summer when he took out. But well, that was one of the ways he made money. He was one of the drivers. I don't know whether it was Chevrolet or Ford, but to transport. Now you have these big trucks that put the cars on the truck and take them all over the country. Well, in those years, someone had to drive the cars, for instance, from the automotive building place here in Fort Worth to California. And that's what he did. He and a group of his friends, there were about 6 of them, and they had to go in a convoy driving from here to deliver the cars in California. And then they hitchhiked back home because they couldn't afford to pay their money. So, anything else? Anybody? I'm having fun, but I know you're probably all sleepy. I am too. But Helen Jean?
I have a Joe Lucas Ride story, Gal. I've heard you talk about this many times, and I know you did too. My mother was his fourth grade teacher. Now, so he was my mother's nephew, and his mother taught the third grade, and you didn't get anything about past her. So mother was in a very awkward position. But anyway, Joe seemed to have a tendency to act up.
Always, yes. Almost like William Buckner.
And so I had to be kind of careful what she did with it, or maybe but anyway, so the way that she disciplined Joe most of the time was have him sit out in the hall. And I heard him say many times to Mr. Cannon would come by and say, well, there you are again, Joe.
Well, I confess, I had that happen to me. I was a very bad girl. Dickie Cruz and Don Austin and I were mean. And we teased little Gwendolyn Crow, I think was her name, because she wore glasses. Well, God punished me. But also, Nell Cruz, who was my teacher, punished me and Don and Dickie by putting us in the hall. Now, when you had to sit in the hall, you sat there through the high school lunch period, and all the high school kids walked by to see that you were, and this was second grade. And so that was punishment enough, but then here'd come Daddy. And that was really, really scary, because he punished me when I got home. He didn't use the paddle. He just, those eyes that somebody talked about a while ago, Bill, I guess, he just used those steely eyes at me, and it scared me to death. Absolutely.
We could use some of that today.
Couldn't we? Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.